Hello, this is Dan Nicewonder, and you're watching the Substance Report, where real substance is most important. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about elections, not just presidential, also contradictions in cultural and economic aspects of society, issues like Medicare for All, and creating movements and coalitions, why that's important and more. So I'm going to get into this right now. Those of you here in the United States, maybe around the world, you know that there's a lot of focus here in the United States on our upcoming 2020 presidential elections. But that's not all that's going on. If you are familiar with the name Kshana Sawant, she is the first socialist to win an election, at least as a city council person in the city of Seattle since 1916. So it's pretty significant. She ran in 2013. She was reelected in 2015. Now she's up for reelection again in 2019. She was responsible for introducing the idea of the $15 an hour minimum wage that was passed in Seattle. And of course, you know, after that, Bernie Sanders adopted that into his presidential party platform. He first ran for president, and that continues to this day. Others have jumped on the bandwagon since, along with Bernie. Of course, it does take a coalition of people to get things moving forward. So it's been very important. So Amazon, Disney, Walmart, I think those are the three main ones that Bernie Sanders has had some success in getting that minimum wage raised with those organizations. And now, from what I understand, there was a House vote to raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. The vote was 231 to 199, so it passed. Some areas of Los Angeles already have 1425. So we're moving in that direction, and largely because, we could say, because of Kshana Sawant up in Seattle as a city council person who won as a socialist. Well, in her second reelection bid in 2019, apparently her opponents are being funded by some of the richest people in the Seattle area, including the richest man in the world, Jeff Bezos, if you know who that person is. He's CEO of Amazon, as far as we know, the richest man in the United States, as well as the former CEO of Starbucks, also a billionaire. Starbucks is also based out of Seattle, and his name is Howard Schultz. So that's the word that's been coming through to me. So organizations all around the country are raising funds for her to help her with her reelection campaign. She is a member of a group called the Socialist Alternative. So that's some other big news, election news going on right now. So if you are one of those people that's lucky, fortunate enough you don't have to work a job, or if you want to take your vacation time and do something for the force of progress, you can connect with the socialist alternative groups, particularly in the Seattle area, and go up there and help campaign for her in Seattle. All right, moving on. As you know, presidential elections going on here. There's been 2 presidential debates already in Miami. There's more coming, I believe, in Las Vegas and then Detroit, Michigan. So there's been 20 candidates in 2 debates. There's actually more than 20 candidates running for president. By the way, let's get Mike Gravel on the debate stages. He doesn't expect to win, but he would be a great candidate to have lively discussion with. And as he said, he could help pull Bernie more to the left. I think that's interesting. But out of those 20 candidates, I think there's only 4 that really I would call genuine progressive. And they will not take corporate money for their campaigns. They're totally into 100% public funding. Even Elizabeth Warren, who does have some progressive ties, she has alluded to the fact that even though she's taking public funding now for the primaries, that if she were to be the nominee, she would at least consider taking corporate PAC money. So I'm wondering why you would even call yourself a progressive and even consider doing that. That's the kind of thing that Barack Obama did. Yes, he won, but many compromises, as we saw, happen when you take corporate money. I mean, it's a no-brainer. If you're getting corporate money from donors, they're not giving you that money because they don't expect something from you. And the fact that this would be illegal is just, to me, mind-boggling, which would lead me into the next part of my discussion here: contradictions in culture and economic aspects of society. But lots of contradictions there in this whole system, if you will, of economics and politics. But the other, besides Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard, Andrew Yang, and Marianne Williamson look to be getting funding through their support systems, public funding. So they, I would say, are more genuine progressives. I don't agree with any one person 100% of the time. I don't even agree with myself 100% of the time. I say this all the time to friends and people that I know, because the reason I say that is because I'm always trying to learn. Every day I'm trying to learn something. So I don't even agree with myself 100% of the time. So I'm definitely not going to agree with everybody 100% of the time, but I do feel a candidate for president is on the right track if you're not submerging yourself and even participating at all in a corporate PAC money or big money from corporations and special interests. So that being said, Bernie Sanders is truly the front runner. He has been, as I can see, if you base it on that, the number of people that are supporting him at his rallies, that are working out in the field for his campaign. There's like 1 million supporters, something like that, that are actually working with him in some capacity or another on his campaign. That doesn't include people that will go out and vote for him, hopefully, in 2020. So there is a lot of backward thinking in our culture and I would say the cultural and economic aspects of our society here in the United States. And really, it's all over the world. Some people might say that's due to neoliberal free market economics. There's all kinds of contradictions, even in discussing political policy, let alone in corporate behavior. As I covered in the very first substance report, I talked about Bernie Sanders, and I will be talking more about his evaluation of what he feels is most important going forward in this country. He talked about that in the debates. And of course, as I mentioned, in the debate discussion that's coming up, and we've seen it already, that most of the topics and of the platform issues come from Bernie Sanders' platform of the last presidential race and this one, and even ties in with various aspects of his decades-long career in politics. So it's obvious who the front runner is and who's the most influential and has the greatest ground game, the most developed ground game, etc., and does it all without taking big corporate money. And people would ask me who I endorse. Well, you know, I do support the fact that those are factors that, to me, would realistically say Bernie Sanders is a true frontrunner, regardless of what the mainstream media might be saying or not saying about him. Which leads me to this: as I get tired of these in mainstream media articles, or CNN or Washington Post, for instance, that obviously have this slant towards what I would call these status quo corporate politicians, like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, and even to some extent Elizabeth Warren. Apparently, they feel no threat of Elizabeth Warren, Wall Street and big money interests anyway. So that in itself should, raise some questions. Not to be just critiquing Elizabeth Warren in a negative way. I'm not saying that, but just to be honest about what we do know and not denying that. And again, as I said, I don't agree with anybody 100%, not even Bernie Sanders or other real, what I would call real progressives. But there are some very important distinctions and consistencies, particularly in the career of Bernie Sanders, that would indicate that he is the most not only experienced candidate, but the most consistent on the issues and on the right side of history of any of the candidates combined. And especially, let's say, Joe Biden, who supposedly is a front runner over all the other candidates, but we'll see how long that will last. It just doesn't seem like that's going to last for a really long time. But I really don't want to talk about the presidential stuff any more than I would have to. There's so many other things I want to get into. I do want to bring up how that is involved in contradictions, because our society, whether you're talking about the corporate world, whether you're talking about political system, mainstream media, there's so many contradictions. Our economic system itself, that to not have some kind of analysis of this, to me, would feel very incomplete, which is why I do this kind of thing with the Substance Report. I'm going to talk about things that I don't see the mainstream media talking about, or even some of my peers in what I would call the left progressive side in social media, on YouTube, etc., issues that they may not actually talk about. Because I know certain things like economics, it's kind of boring to you would think most, when I was first in school, I took economics, I found it very boring, but it's someone like Richard Wolff, the economist, who I'll talk more about a little bit later, who got me interested in the subject when I started realizing what the facts actually were and how economics and politics kind of go hand in hand. And of course, I've learned, especially since Occupy Wall Street, how politics really affects every part of our lives, not just some of them. When it's connected to economics, it's hard to not see that. As much as we'd like to think that when we go off in our own little worlds, like for myself, when I play music or I meditate, there's always some kind of connection to the politics in our day-to-day lives that we can't deny or really run away from realistically. Anyway, don't want to go off on that tangent. I want to get back into the how a lot of things are backwards, the contradictions in the cultural and economic aspects of society. Take, for instance, the basic soundbite that I like to use called people over profits. The way a lot of businesses are structured is very contradictory. I'll get into that more later. The way the corporate world operates is very backward in some cases. For instance, I came across an article, I don't want to mention the name of the company, but it's a quote here from a vice president of a culturally hip shoe company. And he said that his company is known for embracing street art, quote, long before it became fashionable. Every subculture eventually gets broader, and the term street art is now on the tongues of regular folks, end quote. And I was looking at this and reading this like, well, here's a contradiction right here. First of all, when is street art associated with corporate boardrooms? And how would you say every subculture gets broader and the term street art is now on the tongues of regular folks? I would say that's more accurate to say that street art is now on the tongues of executives in corporate boardrooms, because street art is some of the art of regular folks. So again, to me, there's a contradiction there. Somehow this person may be it's probably a well-intentioned, good person, good ideas in some cases with the business operations or whatever, but that seems to be somebody who's out of touch. Somehow it just doesn't make sense. Politically, I can get into another contradiction here. Medicare for All, that literally means healthcare for everyone, for all. That's what that means. Not for some, not for most people, for all. So when our politicians have been settling for getting more people covered, when the premise for a healthcare system should be that you're covering everyone, all of your citizens, it's just, to me, it's a contradiction to say this is something that is better for society. You know, we got 10 million people more covered, but maybe 10 million other people have coverage, but they have a low-wage job where their company takes the premium out of their check every 2 weeks, and they even have less money to spend than they started with an already low-wage job, and then their health care is mediocre in comparison to CEOs of a big corporation or the CEOs even in the very company that they work for. How is that a better plan? That just causes more stress, which, I don't get it. And there's an article in CNN saying that, half the population has some kind of private healthcare insurance, and I believe that they said that the vast majority of people that have the private healthcare insurance, or they're happy with their insurance plan. But again, how many of those people are just glad to have something rather than having nothing, but it takes money out of their checks that are already low wages? Why none of this gets discussed in the article at all? Actually, this article was in the Washington Post. I apologize, I said CNN. No, it's Washington Post. Sometimes I don't know the difference. And sometimes I don't think there is much of a difference, if any. But the contradictions of, even in the article, as I look it up here, as I pull it up, the beginning of the article, it talks about how Medicare polls so well, again, with, most people. I've seen even conservative polls that are like, I think 60% favor some kind of single payer program, which would be, of course, Medicare for All here in the United States. And yet, it sounds like a policy, this author says in this article in the Washington Post, that ought to be an easy sell. But because it polls so well. But then she says, except no, it's not going to be easy at all. At least not when big talk about Medicare for All turns to be the specifics of a system that would rationalize the myriad insanities of the fragmented U.S. healthcare system and get a handle on its exorbitant costs, which are because of the private sector aspect to it, not the public sector, because most countries around the world that we would call civilized, even countries like Saudi Arabia, Korea, North Korea, South Korea, Russia, China, Israel, they have a single payer program. That's why they have it, because it works, right? That's let alone the EU countries and the British Commonwealth countries. And nobody has a perfect system. Nobody said it's a perfect system because it's single payer, but it's preferable to the one the United States has, which seems dominated, at least in the monetary part, by the private sector. And private sector health insurance for profit, healthcare for profit, does that even sound right to you? Where's the moral imperative of people before profits, right? That sounds like it's more profits before people, right? So, and the whole idea of Medicare for all literally means for all. That's why to be for all and to be efficient, it can't be divided amongst public and private in how it's initially administrated for everyone. And that's proven too around the world, that works better when it's administrated by one entity and it's administrated through a public sector. So there's so many contradictions in this article. I mean, I don't even want to recommend that you read it. I mean, you can read it if you want. In the Washington Post, it's an article that's called Sorry, Bernie, but most Americans like their health insurance the way it is. And you even start out your article basically saying Medicare polls so well, which would just totally point out your contradiction. And Bernie recently did a speech on Medicare for All 2019, just like he did a speech on democratic socialism, really defining what that means to him. And I'm going to get into that in another upcoming episode of the Substance Report, the speech that he did. But the one on recently on Medicare for All 2019 speech, I mean, it's just, this is an issue that we shouldn't even be debating anymore. It's like climate change. We already know that it's too much money for there to be middlemen and also just like a pharmaceutical company focusing so much on insane profits over actually helping people. And this, again, this contradiction of, you're putting profits over people in a society that supposedly puts people over profits. And it's insane. And we really need to look closely at this, do some critical analysis. I mean, you don't have to be an intellectual to understand there's a problem, a contradiction there with how that isn't prioritized, especially when you see the actual popularity of it and how the mainstream media tries to spin its angle on it to give you the 0.01% perspective on it and not the vast majority of people's perspective on it. Again, another contradiction. And even Obama flip-flopped on this. Of course, he went along during his presidency. He ran on single-payer healthcare, and then flip-flopped by even taking the public option off the table, where we could go to a single-payer system from a hybrid system or that we already had in place. And he even took the public option off the table, and people feel that it's largely because of the large donors in the pharmaceutical and health insurance companies. So the contradiction there, and now that he's not president anymore, he actually is on the record saying that Medicare for All is actually a good idea. So the contradiction, it's no wonder so many people are confused. It just, our society is riddled with these contradictions even coming out of people's mouths, whether they be in the corporate world, whether they be in the government. And it's just endless. And so it isn't just the president. If those people, understandably, there's concerns about, our president and what he's doing or not doing. But there's so much more to it than just whether this person's tweets stress you out or not. I mean, you have to look at policies and understand how this works and understand the contradictions of the system that we live in, right? Which, by the way, we don't live in a system dominated by socialism. So why is there fear of socialism? And then there's that contradiction too, which we'll talk about more in an upcoming episode of the Substance Report when I do an analysis of Bernie Sanders' landmark speech on what democratic socialism means to him. Very important speech, by the way. That's why I'm going to do the whole episode on it coming up. Okay, let's see. Also, another contradictory thing too is when let's say some of the media, the mainstream media, points fingers at societies where there's authoritarianism, but then not looking at our own society and the oligarchy and the corporate state that we obviously are. There was even a Princeton study that came to the conclusion in 2014 that we are an oligarchy, which would mean it's a corporate state and corporations dominate. That means that's a form of authoritarianism because you have the money in politics and the big corporate donors. Basically, it's their ideas hold sway. They have the power. That's authoritarianism. It's a different style than what we saw in the 1930s, in the 20th century, in the USSR, and also the 1930s in Italy and Germany. But it's still authoritarianism. It's just a different style. So are we going to say, are we not going to have a realistic critique of the good and bad of these systems, including the one that dominates our system right now? And are we going to pretend like there's a free market that exists, as Adam Smith once said, the invisible hand of the market, where there's no interference from outside sources, but there's always interference from outside sources. That's why there's had to be regulation. That's why deregulation has happened to overturn regulation, because there are sources of interference. So again, more contradictions in the cultural and economic aspects of our society. And I could go on and on and on. I could do probably a whole series of episodes just on that subject alone. And also, too, I think we have to understand the role that mainstream media plays. It doesn't really speak the language of the vast majority of people, because it speaks the language of the owners of that media. That's always true, but you have to also understand that here in the United States, you live in a system where there's a Supreme Court law that says basically unlimited amounts of cash can go into the political system. It's called the Citizens United. It was passed in 2010 by the Supreme Court. Also have to understand that lobbying is legal in this country. There are more lobbyists in Washington and the Washington suburbs than there are politicians. And this is all legal in this country. There are places in Europe, it's just, it's illegal. You get caught, lobbying for special interests, then you are guilty and you go to prison. It's a whole different mindset in other parts of the world about that kind of thing. But in the United States, it's business as usual, status quo. So, do you know that? Have you had time to really think about that? It's something we need to ask ourselves. What kind of a society do we want to live in, where there's such massive wealth inequality? And that was not the free hand of the market. That was definitely manipulated by a handful of human beings. So we have the greatest wealth inequality, as well as the greatest wealth creation, at least since the 1920s, if not further back into the 19th century, Industrial Revolution. So this should be alarming to all of us. I've been seeing statistics showing the increasing inequality with all the wealth creation, at least since 2014, 2015. It's just getting worse. Actually, I think the first statistics I really paid attention to in that area was during Occupy Wall Street in 2011, 2012. So again, more of the contradictions. You say, well, there's low unemployment rates, and when people say that, there's a lot of jobs, but they won't really go further and say, what does this really mean? You're analyzing the economy. First of all, when you talk about unemployment statistics, if somebody says at any given time there's, let's say, 3-point-something% unemployment, that's talking about the last 3 months, which would be the last quarter reports of people who said, and they answered when they went to the employment office, they answered a piece of paper, are you working now? No. Are you looking for work? No. Okay. Those are basically where a lot of the statistics are coming from. People that have given up looking for work are the vast majority of people in those statistics. Well, actually, I'm sorry, my correction. If you say, no, I'm not working, and yes, I'm looking for work, those are the people that are included in the statistics. So if you answer, no, I'm not working, and no, I'm not looking for work, that's not included in the statistics. That's one contradiction. Also, again, the fact that it just speaks for a 3-month period that's recent. It doesn't talk about the people that may have been working for a while and now they're collecting unemployment again, or they're working a low-wage job, or they're working temp jobs, or they have to financially deal with low wages while having, as I mentioned earlier, their healthcare premium taken out of their paycheck every 2 weeks. They're already having hardship, and that is added to it. And on and on. There's so many other statistics not even being talked about. And obviously, if people are living comfortably, they're not affected by any of this. That's all some of these people go on. And I had a conversation with somebody on the train the other day. He said, well, isn't the unemployment rate like 3-point-something, and there's lots of jobs? And no mention of the fact that, again, that's just 3-month period, most recent statistic, and no mention of the fact that all those jobs created are low-wage jobs when rents are going up, all kinds of expenses are going up, unless you're in the top 10% of the wage earners or whatever. I mean, where you're less impacted or not impacted at all. So it's just the contradictions and the details left out, and the lack of critical analysis, even good intention, you would think otherwise intelligent people. It's just mind-boggling. I mean, it's good to be aware of it, and you're not alone either. So, which leads me into another area here of movements. As you see, I'm wearing a yellow vest, and I mentioned Occupy Wall Street in 2011. Bernie Sanders, consistently on the campaign trail, says that millions of people need to come together and demand changes. That's how we change our society. That's how we can address the many problems that we face as a society, particularly for the 99% of people. But that's what it's going to require, millions of people coming together to demand changes, creating coalitions. How is that going to be done? Well, movements are a way to start that conversation. Since November of 2018, the French people have been on the streets wearing yellow vests. They're called the Yellow Vest Movement. Basically, it's a protest, much more than just the Macron government, but it's a protest of wealth inequality and even of the system of capitalism and creating this extreme wealth inequality. Keep in mind, while it also created incredible wealth, it also, because, as some people believe, because of how you organize the economy, that is what creates the grotesque wealth distribution inequality. That's what it basically means. It's about how unequal the distribution of the wealth is. And we all create the wealth together. So this is something that had led me to what's called worker co-op, or the worker cooperative, worker-owned cooperative. I first learned about this business model from the economist Richard Wolff, as I mentioned earlier. He came to Los Angeles and talked about that, and then I have since interviewed him for the Nowman show, and I grandfathered his show, Economic Update. It's produced in Manhattan, New York. I grandfathered that into the television station where my show broadcasts here on the Arroyo channel. It's on AT&T Uverse channel 99 and Spectrum Cable channel 32 in LA and Pasadena and beyond. We broadcast Saturday morning and night, 7:30 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. Pacific time on the Arroyo ARROYO channel. And then I grandfather Richard Wolff's Economic Update on at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. So we've talked a lot about worker cooperatives as well on my show. I've had a panel with different experts talking about what work that they do in that regard. And worker cooperatives, if you don't know what they are, they're worker-owned businesses. So you could like have a regular small business, you can have a large corporation, and all the workers, in addition to the whatever jobs that they have, you could be a carpenter, you could be an office worker, you could be a nurse, you could be a teacher, you could be a welder, you could be an IT person. You follow me? It's any job that you would ordinarily do in a company. But in addition to that, you're also one of the owners. So you participate in the most important decision making. That would involve what's produced, how it's produced, where it's produced, and where the profits, or let's say surpluses, would go after expenses are paid. Those are some major examples of the most important decisions that would be made. Just like, for instance, in a lot of the standard corporate model, you have a board of directors that's separate from the workers most of the time. I mean, that the workers might be able to participate in an employee stock owner program, ESOP, but that's not really a cooperative. That's just, you're still going to have the CEOs probably getting, 1,000 times more stock than the average worker is in some of these humongous corporations. So while it's like, it takes the appearance of sharing the wealth, it really has no significant impact. It's better than nothing for the workers. Gives them something additional, but in comparison to what the CEO or CFO is making in those types of organizations, it's just, there's no comparison. Well, in a worker cooperative business, the CEO, do you think the workers, if they have one person, one vote, and they own the company together, do you think they're going to be voting to give the CEO 100, 200, 3 times more money than they get? Highly unlikely that's going to happen. So it does become more of a democratic process. There's more work. It's a challenge to get more people educated about it and participating in it. But they are successful examples, and there are some that exist. Most are in Europe, I would say, in the Emilia-Romagna region of Italy, and also the Mondragon Valley in the North Basque region of Spain. Mondragon Corporation is the largest worker-owned corporation in the world, 75,000 plus worker owners. They have a university, they have an IT department, they have administration, they have, did I say university? They have a university, of course they have factories and stores, so 100 different businesses, all under the umbrella of Mondragon Corporation. I believe their CEO, and this is by vote of all the worker owners, only makes like 12 times as much as the, I think, lowest paid worker, or at least the average pay. So it's a much more democratic process, and it's very successful, very successful. So there are some in the United States, but it's still a challenge to get more people educated about this, so they would want to and have the time to actually do it. There's so much more that I could talk about in regard to that, but I do think that that's what's important about that also is that not only is it more of a democratic process, that each worker has like one person, one vote in the process of the company, big or small, but it also organizes the enterprise differently, which therefore, when you realize you create the wealth together, it also distributes that wealth much differently too. So that's a very, very important piece to bring up. And that's, that would explain why the traditional corporate mission statement or even agenda or even advertisement or even discussion in media, that's why you don't hear it, because it would challenge the traditional system in not only how the wealth is created, but how it's distributed in the first place. But that would address the extreme income inequality, wealth inequality that we have in the United States right now and around the world, really. The greatest since the 1920s that led to the crash, the stock market crash in 1929. And also, we saw that leading up to 2008, and because the banks got bailed out, after that, the people didn't get bailed out, and the vast majority of the population has still not had any economic recovery. The economic recovery that did come was for the wealthiest people at the top. I mean, it's a fact. I'm not making that up. It's not something I believe. Statistics, would indicate that that is actually what's going on, and nothing's being done. It's like a deadlock in our government. The corporate world is just going about business as usual, with their lobbyists getting their agendas through very quickly, while the rest of us are supposed to wait. But wait for what? So that's why we need movements like the Yellow Vest movement in Paris, France, and around the country of France. It has spread some around the world. And when the time comes, I feel that it will be more evident that the people are wanting some kind of massive change. Bernie Sanders keeps talking about that on the campaign trail, as he says millions of people must come together to demand change. That's true. That means we need a movement. He calls it political revolution. I call it a movement. We do need a movement for change, where the people stand together and demand the change that we need, because we have a lot of problems that need to be addressed that do concern the needs, not the wants, of the 99% of the population. Keep in mind, 99%, if you have 330 people in this country right now in the United States, 1% is 3.3 million approximately. 99% then would be approximately 326.7 million. So if those 3.3 million people have 92% of the income, we have a problem. And we're going to have to address it at some point. Bernie Sanders is right to say that his first priority probably is finding a way to bring people together, doing a tour around the country to talk to people about how to create a movement, demand the change, because if we don't, the alternatives could be not what we really would want to see, put it that way. So It's a no-brainer. Trillions of dollars have been lost since approximately after 9/11, when we started these wars, and we increased the military budget astronomically. Each year adding hundreds of billions of dollars to it since 2002. Now, there's also word. I mean, this is not classified information. David DeGraw, the invested journalist, went online and just found statements from attorney generals basically saying, "Oh, we've lost so many billions here, so many hundreds of millions here," and he added it up over time, and it came to something like $21 trillion is missing. That you would say that's our tax dollars. Where did it go? But we can't afford Medicare for All. We're the richest country in the world. But $21 trillion is missing through departments in the government. So again, another contradiction, and I'm getting back to that. But this is why we need a movement. And this is serious moral stuff, man. I mean, we shouldn't have so many homeless people on the streets. There's no reason why we can't have a single-payer program in this country. There should be plenty of money for that. So much wealth in the richest country in the world. We can end the poverty. There's no reason that children or anybody should go to bed at night hungry. There's no reason why anybody should be out on the streets. Let's get real here. Are we going to put people before profits or not? Are we going to be real? Are we just going to say we're moral people, or are we actually going to talk and walk the talk? This is the question I'm going to pose to every single one of you, because as Bernie says, yes, millions of people do come together, need to come together to demand changes. That means you and me. That doesn't mean he can do it all, or even now Lee has a handful of women in the House. No, it requires all of us being on board. And that's one of the reasons why I make the substance report, is to help share information, encourage you, as I do my other work, even with the Nowman show. By the way, I am on YouTube. I have 2 channels: the Nowman show on the Arroyo channel, which is the TV show content, and then the Nowman show on YouTube. That's my regular YouTube channel for the Nowman show, which will include the substance report and other content like this too. So I do have a PayPal account, Daniel Nicewander, and the Patreon account I have is a work in progress. So any support, I'll let you know when there's updates there, and I'll let you know what's coming up next. So that's still a work in progress. Also, I'm interested in bartering with someone out there who has experience with After Effects or some kind of 3D effects that could be used in Adobe Premiere Creative Cloud software. It's a project I have coming up in from that one, and other things can happen further on down the road. Some exciting things coming up in 2020 that I can't talk about yet, including more musical performances, which I've already started doing. That's technically what I started doing even before media or being a journalist, is music professionally. And you can see that documentary also about my career in music on the Nowman show on the Aurora channel and the Nowman show YouTube channels. So Patreon account is a work in progress, and I'll let you know. But the PayPal right now exists, and anything you can do to help with this work, etc., would be most appreciated. And let me know what you would like to see me talk about or go into as far as substance and substantive content. My email address is thenowmanshow, Nowman show 2017@gmail.com. Okay, so I had to throw that in there. Any updates here? Anything further? Look at my notes here real quick. I think that's all that I wanted to cover right now. That was a lot, and thank you for your patience and listening to the rambling. Some of it is, but it comes from having a lot of information I think it's important to share. Again, if you have any questions, comments, let me know. And until next time, my name is Dan Nicewander. You're watching the Substance Report, where real substance is the most important.